Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Sunday School. So, able to get started closer to on time today, and so last time we finished chapter 20 of Wayne Grudem's Christian beliefs. Like I said, there is a revised edition available on Amazon, and you are more than welcome to go pick a copy up. I don't get anything for that. It's just a good resource. It's a good study guide, something to get you started, and hopefully better understand. If you've already started, you'll be able to better understand what it is you believe and why you believe it. So good stuff there. And I'm going to do a lesson today. It's something I've been putting off for a while. I wasn't sure where I would do this or who my audience would be, and had an interesting conversation when I was filling in at one of the churches a few weeks back on a Wednesday night Bible study. And one of the biggest problems we have right now in the church, among many problems, we have a lot of problems throughout the church, is that there's division. There's people arguing over this medicine, that medicine, mask, no mask. There's a lot of tension going on there. Pardon me. And so this is something that I've been feeling like I need to do. I just wasn't quite sure where I was going to do it and when. And after that conversation I had a few weeks back, where they have a church member who thinks everybody has to wear a mask because she feels like she should wear a mask, and it's it's causing tension and issues with other members of the church because she's like constantly, y'all need to wear a mask, and she can't just back off and be okay wearing her own. And and look, if you feel like you need to wear one, wear one. Don't be a stumbling block for people who aren't going to wear a mask. I don't wear a mask unless I have a very specific reason. I was trained in the military to run a respirator program, and so I was fully trained and certified to fit test and train other people for respirators. I was trained on the types of cartridges for the different situations, and quite frankly, an N95 mask, whether it's medically rated or not, is not going to prevent a disease. And that's just, but again, if it makes you feel better and you want to wear one, wear one. But that's not the point of today's lesson. We're looking at pharmakeia in medicine and idolatry. And I think to fully understand this, obviously you got to go back and look at, first thing you should be aware of and keep in mind is Genesis. God created man, right? On the sixth day, God created man. And every time God created something during the 6 days of creation, he said, and he saw that it was good, right? So mankind was good. And of course, this is before the fall, so there's no sin, there's no corruption. God's creation is perfect. And, Adam and Eve were in the garden with no clothes. They didn't have a house. They didn't have blankets. They didn't need anything. They were perfectly healthy. It was perfect temperatures, all this stuff going on, right? Of course, then they get kicked out of the garden. And so now all of a sudden they have to have coverings, right? So they have to have clothing to protect them from the elements. Well, now you have sin, right? So sin brought death. And, it brought disease. And especially as mankind chased after false gods, self-pleasure, all these other things that were not of God, and in the process of doing so, and eating flesh that was not properly cooked, having strange sexual relations that were inappropriate, and there's a lot of disease and stuff that comes from these behaviors, and it's all against God. But what I'm going to start out really looking at trying to think if I didn't. Okay. What I'm going to start off looking at, though, is the bronze serpent in Numbers chapter 21, verses 4 through 9. Now, why is that significant? Well, if you look on, especially ambulances, they have that little asterisk-looking symbol, and in the middle of it is a staff with a serpent wrapped around it, right? Because you can find healing, right? So supposedly through a paramedic may save your life, take you to the hospital, that sort of thing. If you go to pharmacies where you can get these, life-saving medicines, so to speak, and other things of that nature, they have what they call the caduceus. It's a staff with two serpents intertwined around it with wings. Now, that's not exactly associated with healing, although it is associated with sorcery. You do a little study into caduceus, and Hermes was one of the Greek gods, and he carried one of these staffs. And there's this idea of science and trying to change things and different things like that. You actually will find it with alchemists. They worship the god Hermes. So throughout history, there's some tie-ins and references to Moses' serpent on the staff. But we're going to look at this. That actually is what I want to pull up my Bible. Okay. Numbers chapter 21. We'll read this real quick. Now, I will give a disclaimer here for this. I'm not diagnosing anything. I'm not telling you to quit your medication. I'm not telling you to find a new doctor. I'm not telling you anything other than what the Bible says. You can pray and make your own decisions for your own health and determine, what course of action you need to do. But again, I would highly encourage you to do your own research and, if necessary, get a second opinion. Growing up, that's what I heard all the time was get a second opinion. Get a second opinion. Nowadays, there's no such thing as a second opinion. It's what the insurance company's doctors tell you to do, and that's what you do. So it's a personal decision, something you have to decide on your own. But again, I'm not going to treat you or diagnose you or tell you to quit taking your medication. Certainly not without talking to your doctor. So don't think I'm doing anything here. I'm not playing doctor on the internet. I'm just telling you guys what the Bible says. So let's see here. Numbers chapter 21. And so this is the Israelites have left Egypt, and they're out wandering in the wilderness. And let's see here, starting in verse 4. Then they set out from Mount Hor by way of the Red Sea to bypass the land of Edom. But the people became impatient because of the journey. People spoke against God and Moses. Why have you led us from Egypt to die in the wilderness? There is no bread or water, and we detest this wretched food. That's the manna falling from heaven. Then the Lord sent poisonous snakes among the people, and they bit them so that many Israelites died. The people then came to Moses and said, we have sinned by speaking against the Lord and against you. Intercede with the Lord so that he will take the snakes away from us. And Moses interceded for the people. Then the Lord said to Moses, make a snake image and mount it on a pole, or a serpent, and mount it on a pole. When anyone who is bitten looks at it, he will recover. So Moses made a bronze snake and mounted it on a pole. And whenever someone was bitten and he looked at the bronze snake, he recovered. Now, why would God do this? I don't know exactly why, but clearly the Israelites were having issues, kind of a buyer's remorse kind of a thing. It said it right there. God, you led us out of Egypt to die in the wilderness. Well, we would have been better off back there, right? So, God didn't like that. And, why he told him to make this bronze serpent and put it on a staff, I don't know. But that's what he did, right? And this bronze serpent, interestingly enough, became a point of worship. And instead of going to God, the Israelites got to the point where they were worshiping and making offerings to this bronze serpent on a stick. And it's interesting how this is very much like what the pagan people did. Now, clearly the power is not in the serpent itself. The power is in God. And that was the vehicle he used to heal the people. And it was a way of bringing them back into repentance, bringing them back into, following and obeying God. So Moses did that, right? Well, as I said, this became a point of worship. It became an idol to them, to the point where they were giving offerings to it. Now, when I was doing my genealogy of Christ study, and I was going through the kings of Judah, when you get to 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 4, and this is King Hezekiah, son of Ahaz. I found this really interesting because all throughout Israel as a whole, not just the southern portion and the northern portion, they were all having problems with idolatry. And that was always how they would fall into sin, and they would do poorly. And when they rejected the idolatry, they would do well and they would prosper and that sort of thing, right? So King Hezekiah comes along, and he wants Judah to thrive and prosper. So at verse 4, he removed the high places and broke the pillars and cut down the Asherah. And he broke into pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made, for until those days the people of Israel had made offerings to it. It was called Nehushtan. And I found some other links and tie-ins with the Caduceus and the name given to it by the Greeks. And there's, that's some interesting stuff there. All right, so, but it became an idolatry thing. It became an idol for them to worship, and they were giving offerings to this bronze serpent as if it could heal them. When again, the reality is that the bronze serpent by itself could do nothing. It was only the power of God that could heal the people, right? But, again, because of pagan influence, they were worshiping it. And so here's King Hezekiah, who actually goes and destroys this thing. It was this, historical relic that Moses had made. And so it was something they were going to hold on to. It's like, hey, look, this is, part of our history. But when he saw that it was an idol to them, he had it destroyed, right? And that's part of the whole thing with worshiping God, is getting the idols out of your life. So, which is kind of the point of today's lesson is, has medicine become our idol? Rather than trusting in God for his creation, he gave us immune systems. Our bodies are capable of healing themselves. I mean, you read the Old Testament, and Methuselah lived to be 964 years old. Adam lived to be 950 years old. So the human body is capable, if it's properly maintained, if we are healthy. And look, I'm a poor fat guy living in the woods. I get it. I'm working on losing some weight right now. But, if we're healthy, we live longer than if we're not healthy. And that's a lot of the Levitical laws in the Old Testament were about keeping the Jews healthy, keeping the Israelites healthy so that they would live longer than everybody else and be clean and pure and that sort of thing. So now we get to Pharmakeia. And this is... the primary thing a lot of preachers go for with this, and a lot of people explain Pharmakeia as is sorcery, and that's how it's used most often throughout the New Testament in the Greek, right? Pharmakeia is a Greek word. The Hebrew word for sorcery is, and I haven't taken Hebrew, so pardon my pronunciation of this, but kisapaik. And that appears throughout, it's in like Isaiah, there's scripture in Exodus, and which is a lot of times referring to the Egyptian magicians and trying to do their sorcery, right? So sorcery, though, overall is defined as the use of medicine, drugs, or spells. And of course, from Pharmakeia, we get the word pharmacy and pharmaceuticals. So you have, and I'm not going to tell you that you're going to hell because you took Tylenol or an allergy medication. I'm not going to say, I mean, I have to take allergy meds certain times of the year. If I know someone's got a cat and I'm going over to visit, I got to take my allergy pills. I take NSAIDs frequently, probably more than I should, but it is what it is. So if you're taking a decongestant, that's not what I'm talking about here. And I'll get into some of that in a little bit with where these different medicines we're taking every day come from, over-the-counter stuff. But when we look at, especially like the mood-altering drugs that are supposedly for anxiety and psychotic issues and, trying to treat ADHD and different things of that nature, those medicines can be questionable. And honestly, I think some of that would fall into the sorcery. And if you did some research just to have a general understanding, like if you look at voodoo, which is the national religion of Haiti, part of voodoo is finding these like psychedelic herbs or flowers, plants, vegetables, whatever, mushrooms, and it's not so much treating a health issue as it is trying to, someone does heroin or someone does crack or, there's what, Jemison weed, I think, is one I've heard of that's a natural, something that grows out in the wild, even here in Alabama, that could kill you if you're trying to get high or do something stupid. You're trying to put yourself in this altered state. And those are things that can be used to manipulate you, to control you, to put fear in other people, right? So that kind of falls into the whole sorcery thing. And that like LSD, right? Developed 60s, 70s, and it was actually something developed by the CIA, and they were doing these massive experiments trying to brainwash people and manipulate people, right? That's sorcery. It's not, we think of sorcery from the movies of like shooting lightning bolts from your fingers or having a magic crystal staff and shooting rays from it, or saying stuff backwards makes it float or something ridiculous. But more often than not, sorcery is trying to find chemicals, whether they're natural or artificial chemicals, to alter somebody's state of being, their mood, their the way their brains work. Like I said, they try to brainwash people. And that's not conspiracy stuff. That's real things going on. So to kind of get into like pharmacies, right? I mean, there's always been healers and there's always been natural remedies for things. And, God created everything on earth to be beneficial to mankind. Of course, things got corrupted after the garden, but there are things today, there are fruits and vegetables that are good for your whole bodily function, brain functions, your circulatory system. There's natural remedies, and that doesn't fall under sorcery. That's not, yellow root, I've heard from people, has cured cancer, which I'm not making any claims to anything here. I went through a period of time when I was driving a truck when I was getting blood clots in my legs, and rather than go and get put on blood pressure medication for the rest of my life, I found a natural remedy through molasses. It sounds weird, but 2 tablespoons of molasses every day, and in 6 weeks my blood clots were gone. I didn't need man-made medication. I make my own antibiotics. There's natural things out there such as garlic and actually white pine tar. It's something they get turpentine from, but there's actual antibiotic properties to that sort of stuff, right? So Um, I have gotten over strep throat in about 3 days using what I call garlic juice. It's a half a quart of raw honey, half a quart of apple cider vinegar, and 6 to 8 cloves of garlic chopped up, and you stir it up, mix it up, let it sit for about 3 days, and the apple cider vinegar will draw out the chemical in the garlic that is a natural antibiotic. So, man-made antibiotics are constantly having to be changed and updated because a lot of the bacteria out there is getting used to and adapting to these man-made antibiotics. And so there's natural ones that the bacteria is not immune or adapted to that we can use in much better, but there's no profit in that, right? Or at least not near as much. So, there are natural remedies, and again, I'm not talking about natural remedies out of God-made things. But when you look at like pharmacies, and especially here in America, how the pharmaceutical industry as a whole has changed the way we do things and the way we view things. It has changed our whole medical procedures. And there was the first pharmacist guild in America was established in the 17th century, which may have been outside of America too, but in the 17th century, so 1700s, about the same time we started coming to America, that's when they created the pharmacist guild, right? Which was everybody getting together and agreeing on and teaching each other kind of the same things. And back then they were using homeopathic natural medicines and herbs and things of that nature. So here in America, the FDA was established in 1938 to regulate and control food, drugs, and actually cosmetics was initially under the FDA in 1938. And then by 1951, an amendment added control, or basically pushed the pharmacies into only being able to sell over-the-counter medications and things by prescription only. Because there was a period of time when the pharmacist was actually mixing and making the drugs themselves, right? So, that's where we've gotten our pharmacies from here in America, and largely throughout the world. But, so to go back to the sorcery thing, right? Because again, you can find herbs and you can make chemicals that control people. And one of the things, when you've really come across Pharmakeia, especially in the New Testament, is Galatians chapter 5, verses 19 through 21. See here, it says, the acts of the flesh are obvious: sexual immorality, impurity and sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. I warn you, as I warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. So, again, chasing after your own flesh, chasing after your own pleasure, trying to manipulate others to do the same things you're doing or to do bad things themselves, to have no control over yourself, which you've been around drug addicts, these people, generally speaking, don't have the ability to control themselves. They certainly can't control the impulse to do the drugs, and when you're on these weird drugs, you act out in ways that are just contrary to what normal people do in society. But again, right there in verse 20, sorcery. So if you're involved in sorcery, which again is the use of medicine or drugs or spells to accomplish whatever your desired result is. It's people who call themselves witches go out and they practice sorcery. They're trying to use natural herbs in many cases. And like I said, the companies and the governments and pharmaceutical companies are trying to use man-made chemicals to achieve the same results. Now, if you're legitimately seeking help for your anxiety issues or something of that nature that helps you to be a functioning person in society, I'm not going to tell you that that's bad and that's going to send you to hell. I mean, but it's interesting how many people, especially within the church, the numbers almost match people in the church that are on these anxiety medications as opposed to people not in the church who are on anxiety medications. And the results, the side effects. We had a foster child a couple of years ago, and she was the last one we had, and she was on a bunch of different meds. And there was one morning I got up to go to work. I get up at like 4 a.m. and I'm driving down my driveway, and she's sitting there in her underwear in the middle of the driveway because the medication she was on, she would have these sleepwalking episodes. And, you know, I had to get her back in the house, but she had woken up outside, freaked out, and she's scared. She didn't know what's going on. And she, you know, so they were trying to give her all these different drugs at the same time, basically practicing sorcery on her to get her right, when there's other things you could do, like figuring out where her vitamin levels are at to make sure that she's healthy and that she has the proper nutrients in her system so her brain can function properly, right? And I'm not saying that's a total cure, but that gets you to a point where you can better judge what medication she does need or doesn't need. And all too often doctors will just sit there and pile on one medication after another because you give them this one and now they have this symptom and that one's gone, but this new symptom pops up. So you give them this medication for that symptom, but that causes another issue. So you give them another medication, which then, it becomes a big mess. And I'm going to get into that in just a minute. As far as idolatry, though, and that's part of the problem is we're looking to our own devices to try to figure out these medicines to be able to treat illnesses and different things, rather than putting our faith and trust in God to heal us, to get that we should eat properly and take vitamins and things that are natural to the earth, that are natural to our bodies, so that we can heal ourselves and so that we can seek healing through God. Please be careful with the table, hon. It's shaking. Sorry.
Fair.
Thank you. So, in 1910, I guess this is here in America, but in 1910, a gentleman named Abraham Flexner, who was an educational theorist, was hired by Rockefeller, J.D. Rockefeller, right, one of the big industrialists who helped, quote unquote, build America. And the report was about the state of medical schools in America and Canada. Now, at that time in 1910, there was 180 medical schools throughout North America. And so this Flexner guy, who was not a doctor at all, again, he was an educational theorist. That's not something new. We have those today, but they had them back in the 1900s, the early 1900s. It was very interesting to me. But because of this report, and they wanted to evaluate the medical schools here in America because they were looking at the medical schools in Germany and they were not the same. They wanted us to kind of catch up to what Germany was doing with their medical schools and tighter controls, more uniform teaching, more of a science-based kind of a thing rather than a holistic approach to healing the body, which is what we were doing here in America. We were taking a holistic approach, a homeopathic approach. So Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, Mellon, and J.P. Morgan got together and began providing grants to schools. They picked the best schools on the list of the 180. And they started providing grant money to these schools, provided they would change the curriculum from homeopathic-based medicine to allopathic-based medicine, in which allopathic medicine is using science drugs derived from, at that time, they were figuring out oil distillates, petroleum distillates could be made into medications. And that was part of Rockefeller's thing, is he owned a lot of oil wells, and he was big in that stuff. So was Mellon. And so, they wanted to corner the market with the pharmaceutical industry. And so within 15 years of the report being issued, being written, we went from 180 medical schools in North America down to about 80 of them. So we lost like 100 schools. Again, the grant funding coming in, the change of the curriculum over to allopathic medicine from homeopathic. And even to this day, finding a homeopathic doctor is difficult. And, finding an herbalist that is able to work with a homeopathic doctor to help you get healthy is a difficult thing to find. It gets really expensive. So, we've gotten to this point in America where we're rejecting God's healing, God-made healing through natural parts of the world. It's like I said, there is an herb called chaparral, and it is a natural anti-inflammatory. We call them NSAIDs now, right? It's like Aleve, Tylenol, those Advil, those are NSAIDs. Well, chaparral is an all-natural herb. You take the leaves, you dry them out, you crush them up, you grind them, and you can make a pill out of it. And this is what my grandmother would take. She absolutely hated any kind of medicine, and she would only take natural painkillers, and that's what chaparral was. And so it's anti-inflammatory. And what's interesting to me is when you look at the product Aleve or naproxen sodium, when that hit the market, they had to get FDA approval. So former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld at the time, and this was late 80s, early 90s, went and lobbied before Congress to get FDA approval for naproxen sodium. And I'm here to tell you, naproxen sodium is way better than Motrin. Unfortunately, I've developed an allergic reaction to naproxen sodium, so I can't take it anymore. But you used to be able to rather easily get chaparral. Well, what was their reasoning behind the need for Aleve, for naproxen sodium, if you had chaparral, which is this natural, God-created plant? And they claimed that this elderly couple out in California that were herbalists died as a result of mixing chaparral with something else, and so therefore it was dangerous, and that they made that up. They lied to Congress. And so all of a sudden, chaparral is very difficult to find now. It's expensive, it's hard to find. And even back then, like I said, my dad would order like this 5-pound sack of it, and he and my grandmother would sit at the table with gel caps and make pills. And then, this wasn't any kind of weirdo stuff. It was just a natural anti-inflammatory. When you look at NSAIDs right now, such as Motrin or naproxen sodium, it messes with your liver. It causes liver damage. Why? Because it's oil byproducts. It's hydrocarbons derived from petroleum. So that's not a natural thing to put in your system. And like I said, I take those. I get it. I understand that. But I would take chaparral in a heartbeat if it was easy to get to. It's just not, right? So here in America, and really throughout the world, and we're seeing this with man-made medications. All these vaccines they want you to take right now. And again, if you think you need to take it, go for it. I'm not going to tell you not to, but, we have a natural immune system in our bodies that God created. And all of the science that's coming out after the fact is actually showing us that many of these vaccines we're being told to take don't work near as well as what they promise. And so, right now, almost 70% of the people in hospitals right now with the Rona are vaccinated. Maybe it goes easier for them. Maybe they're in and out quicker. I don't know. I just know that almost 70% of the people in the hospitals right now with the Rona have been vaccinated, and that's fully vaccinated with boosters. So, you've got to look at this information out there. You've got to decide for yourself. You've got to think about this. You've got to pray about this. Am I going to take whatever medication? Do I really need to take whatever medication? And I would say trust the doctors, but here's the thing. Again, the medical schools, going all the way back to 1910, have been changed to this science-based allopathic medicine rather than a holistic approach. And so doctors and nurses as a whole are trained to push whatever these pharmaceutical companies are making. That's the way that they're trained and taught and expected to care for their patients. And I'm not saying all that's bad. But I'm not saying it's all good either. Like I said, you've got to pray about it. You got to figure out what it is you really want to do with your body. I mean, and they're going to the extreme right now where there's people being taken off of the organ transplant list because they refuse to be vaccinated. And somebody might say, well, that's dumb. But, they're telling you that you're going to die if you don't get vaccinated. But there's people getting vaccinated that are dying. It's just the rhetoric doesn't match all the numbers, doesn't match, the information that's coming out after the fact. But they're denying these life-saving transplants to people who are healthy other than that, particular issue. And they're telling them they can't have a transplant because they won't get a vaccine. Well, that's not the Hippocratic Oath. That's not that's not doing no harm to somebody. That's withholding treatment because you don't want to take some other treatment that may or may not even be necessary. So we have to think about this. We have to decide. And as Christians in the church, we cannot allow this kind of stuff to be a stumbling block. Again, if you've been convinced that you need some certain medication in order for you to survive, that's between you, your doctor, and God. And I'm not going to chastise you. I'm not going to call you names. I'm not going to do anything to pass judgment on you because you feel like that's what you need to do. But if you then turn around and start trying to make everybody else do the same thing you're doing, then we have a problem. Do not be a stumbling block. And that goes in both directions. So those of us who have the freedom, Peter talks about this, when it comes down to eating, if you're going to eat food that's been offered up to idols, and you think you don't have an issue, your conscience tells you, your Christian conscience tells you that's no big deal, but this person over here who's a Christian as well has a problem with it. Okay, well, then don't give them a reason to have a problem. Don't sit there and do it in front of them. Go and, do it by yourself. And vice versa. If you feel convicted against doing a certain thing, like I feel convicted against listening to secular music, so I don't listen to secular music as a whole. I mean, what's that been, 17 years? Roughly 17 years, I haven't listened to secular music. I mean, there's bumper music when you're listening to radio shows. Somebody else has their music playing, But if you look at my playlist, if you go on my radio, my car, there's no secular music.
It's all talk.
It's all talk radio.
All boring talk radio.
Yeah, that's a matter of opinion, obviously. But, just checking my time here. All right. But I don't look at anybody else and say you're going to hell because you got country music on your radio in your car. I would find that interesting if you went through the congregation and looked around and went out in everybody's car to see what their radio is tuned to, what CD is in their car, what's on their playlists. But again, I'm not going to sit there and pass judgment on you because you haven't gotten to the same place I have spiritually about listening to certain types of music, right? So if you feel like you've got to wear a mask, or if you feel like you've got to get a vaccine, or if you feel like you've got to take this medication or that medication, then that's between you and God. But don't be that stumbling block. And then again, if you feel like you don't need those things, don't give other people grief who aren't at the same level. You know, I don't say this as a braggart in any sort of boastful way, but there's very little I fear on this earth. I don't fear people. Am I concerned about some of them? Yes. That's why I carry a gun. But I do that for protection, not because I want to go out and start a war, right? And there's other people out there who don't think like that. Other people who won't carry a gun. Other people who, and I don't look down on anybody, but, I'm going to fear God more than I'm going to fear man. And so when you have man-made medications and you have man-made diseases and you have these different things that the world is going through right now, I put my faith and trust in God. And so, it's when you look at the Bible as a whole, it really is more about spiritual healing than it is about physical healing. And yes, Christ healed people, and obviously God, back there in Numbers with the Israelites in the wilderness, he healed them, which was, bringing them back into repentance, bringing them back into faith, and helping them to see where they had done wrong by questioning God. But, God can heal if he wants to. And, do we have enough faith and trust in him to allow him to do so? And then what exactly is the most important part of that? Through our suffering, through our weakness, God's strength is shown, right? Because he sustains us. Now, maybe he does heal us physically here on earth, or the healing happens when we're in our heavenly bodies in heaven. But it's up to God. And again, our spiritual health is far more important. So when we do get sick and we do have these issues, and we rely on God to heal us, to carry us through the storm, so to speak, then we do so much more for the kingdom of God than we do rather than, think about the lepers that Christ healed. It was 10 lepers, and only one came back to thank him. The rest ran off and didn't have anything more to do with Christ. So we have to decide how much suffering that we're able to deal with and how much God can help us deal with. So when we decide to, are we going to take this medication or that medication? But we definitely don't need to treat our medicines, though, like idols. And society wants you to buy into this idea that you need medicine for everything, and that's just not true. It's every time you turn around, we're going to give you some kind of medicine. There's this disease that only affects 1% of the people in the world, so you need this medicine for that disease. Really? 99% of the people in the world don't get it, but only 1% do, and you're telling me I need medication and I need some vaccine to treat this disease that I have a 1 out of 100 chance of getting. That's kind of like, that's like a fear-based thing. That's you're going to die if you don't get these medications, so you need to take them. Well, how's humanity survived for 5,700 plus years without that medication? And I'm not saying it's not tragic when somebody dies of a disease. It is. And it's unfortunate, and it's a loss, and I hate that happens, but it is, we have the curse of sin on us. It's because of that curse, it is the natural order of life for us to die at some point. God knows when we're going to die, and he knows, when we're going to live, but who are we putting our faith and trust in? Are we putting it in God, or are we putting it in doctors? Now, I will say this, having a broken arm before and I got 2 plates and 14 screws in my right forearm. Thank God for the doctor. Absolutely, without a doubt, thank God for the doctor. He did an excellent job. And, so yes, there are necessities for doctors. There's, good reasons to have doctors to do certain things. But, we have to be mindful, we have to be prayerful, we have to be thoughtful on just what issues we have that really truly require medication. We all want the instant healing pill. We want the instant weight loss pill. We want the instant whatever. Give me that pill so I feel better. No, I don't want to deal with my issues. I don't want to get right with God and confess all my sins. I want to just take a pill and feel better. Well, I mean, that falls under sorcery. That's not the way to do it. You've got to deal with your issues. And, and if it's like when the ancient sailors used to get scurvy. Well, at some point, somebody finally figured out we need vitamin C. If you don't have enough vitamin C in your system, you develop scurvy, and that's what was happening to these sailors. So they began to carry citrus with them, and all of a sudden, scurvy went away. It wasn't, let's go to a lab and create something to, it was, hey, let's figure out how we heal the body. And of course, you need proper nutrients. A whole lot of people that are sick in the world today, especially here in America, is because we are vitamin deficient. Our fruits and vegetables are farmed, we're over farming our land, so we're using tremendous amounts of fertilizers, and as a result, the soil is depleted, and so our fruits and vegetables today don't have near the nutrients that they used to have. So even if you want to be a super healthy vegetarian, you're still not getting enough nutrients. And neither are the animals that we're eating, the pork, the beef, the chicken, whatever. So, we have to ask ourselves, are we doing it God's way or are we doing it man's way? And so as we're getting this wrapped up here, John 3:14 and 15. And Christ says, just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, so that everyone who believes in him will have eternal life. So, yes, there is healing at the cross. It's a spiritual healing before it's anything else. Old friend Jimmy Gray, when he got saved, he was diabetic, and even after he got saved, he still had to have his legs amputated below his knees. So why didn't God heal his body? Well, that didn't matter so much because he had to heal his soul first, and his spirit had to be healed. And so what a point of testimony. I live this way, and this is the end result of how I lived this way, and now I live for Christ, and that's a whole different thing. And so, we have to be spiritually healed, and it's, God does what God does. So we look to the cross, look to the one who is hung upon the cross for our healing. Again, spiritually. And there's, and I meant to look up the numbers on this, but since we've been going through all this lockdown stuff over the last 2 years, anxiety medications have gone through the roof. Their sales have shot up tremendously. There's an increased number of people, young and old, taking anxiety medication that weren't taking them 2 years ago before the lockdown stuff. People can't stand to be separated like that. So pharmaceutical companies today are making billions because between them and the government, they have convinced you to be fearful of everything, and so they're doing all this different stuff to keep you out of church, to keep you away from hope and faith, to just make things difficult on you, right? So we're going in a direction, and there's going to come a time, and God says this when he's talking to John in Revelation chapter 18, verse 23. The light of a lamp will never shine in you again, and the voices of a bride and groom will never call out in you again. For your merchants were the great ones of the earth, because all the nations were deceived by your sorcery. And so the more people get on medications, the more screwy our head gets and the easier we're manipulated and controlled. And when the enemy comes, it's going to be much easier for him to take control of humanity because of sorcery, because of unnecessary medications, because of fear tactics and anxiety, because of divisions in the church. You know, again, we shouldn't be stumbling blocks against each other. If you think you need to wear a mask, wear one. But don't be upset because somebody else doesn't. You know, I mean, plenty of videos out there on TikTok and these other places where there's some, you know, there was one video on an airplane and this lady freaks out because the guy took his mask down to take a drink or eat some food. And she's not even wearing her mask properly, and she starts assaulting the guy because she's in this state of panic and fear. And then she's going to probably go and take some medication, some man-made medication that's going to, you know, help her get over that, right? Be mindful of what you're doing, how you're doing it. Be prayerful, be thoughtful, and hopefully it's not as confusing as it may have come out. But trust God, folks. Trust God first and foremost above everybody else. Do things as close to natural in God's way as you can do them. And pray about it. So God bless. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.